Kate Rains here with our first lecture for the class, Multicultural Children's Literature. Ta-da! And my favorite quote, some things one can see for oneself, other things depend on the telling of the tale. And we're going to look at a lot of tales in this class, a lot of children's books. And this is a very pleasant, wonderful, little sweet story. Click, clack, moo, cows that type. And it's basically about cows that take over the barnyard, which really means we're talking about anarchy. So there are different ways to look at stories, and there's different ways to tell stories, and we're going to look at that in depth in this class. Another interesting one, When a Bully is President, Truth and Creativity for Oppressive Times, wonderful author Maya Gonzalez. And, of course, we also are going to be looking at appropriateness, age developmentally appropriate sort of things that we would be sharing with children. But there's lots of messages in books, and children get these messages with or without our help. So hopefully we can change how we provide messages and give less stereotypes and more embracive sort of ways to tell the story. Because here's something that's kind of interesting. That's my daughter Zoe looking at that solar eclipse, what was a number of years ago now, right? Harry Potter saved my life. What? Okay, so I'm going to skip past J.K. Rowling's transphobia right now and just go into a study that was done several years ago now that looked at kids that read J.K. Rowling's books, the Harry Potter series specifically, that it was more likely to reduce their prejudices towards minority groups. So that's how they say it in the UK, right? So makes them more empathetic and understand there's diverse population in their society, and they're better apt to not be such, asshats about it, actually. So where was Harry Potter for these guys way back? We would probably need at least as many books for them to reduce their prejudices towards other members of our society, right? How about this one? Oh, they're going to need a whole big old stack. Oh, wait a minute. What about this one? The insurrection of January 6th. Let me calculate. How many Harry Potter books would it take to... So you're wondering what that all has to do with multicultural children's literature, right? And we're going to dig into that. So this book here is out of our hands, hopefully. I mean, someone might kind of dig across some of these kind of books, but let's just hope they're not in libraries, they're not in children's hands, they're not in bookstores. But I have to say, this book is still being published. It's still published. It's still out there. And look, it was published in 1899. So if it's out there, it's still in the hands of children. So an interesting quote from the Council on Interracial Books is that children are repeatedly exposed to racist and sexist attitudes in books, right? And that overexposure to these messages gradually distort their perceptions until stereotypes are accepted as reality. So let's think about that. So, of course, we're bombarded by messages in our environment, right? Social media tells you that. You just get things left and right about how to be and how to look and how to whatever think, right? But if we look at just putting books into children's hands and giving them books filled with stereotypes, awful negative stereotypes, that children accept these stereotypes as a reality. That's my dog Jupiter in the background. I don't know if you heard her. She wants me to take her for a walk. So look at that. Stereotypes are accepted as reality. That's kind of a horrific sort of notion. So what's the connection? And there's all sorts of books out there looking at dominant cultural beauty ideas about how you should look, and it's objectifying girls, and it's also just highlighting the white race quite often when we're looking at these books about beauty, because there's ideal ways to look at beauty, right? Barbie's Princess School. My Little Beauty Shop. The Makeup I Love. Can't wait to dig into that book. Today I'll be a princess. What's the connection? So look at this. Scholastic, who does fabulous books, that reprints books and does all sorts of them because they offer them at all the schools and they're inexpensive and kids can get their hands on some pretty great books. But look at this one. Red Riding Hood Gets Lost. So look who's the wolf now, right? What's the connection to this? Objectifying girls and women's beauty. And then there's this book, The Five Chinese Brothers. Once upon a time, there were 5 Chinese brothers, and they all looked exactly alike. The problem is it's a fabulous, fabulous story, but they all look exactly alike. Let's not perpetuate those kind of stereotypes, and let's hope this book is gone. I think it was published in, I believe, 1952, so maybe it's gone. But no, it's not, because I look all the time and it's not gone. It's in World Market all the time. So it's in the hands of children, perpetuating some really kind of awful stereotypes. "61% of Asian Americans believe there's discrimination against Asian Americans, and younger Asian Americans are significantly more likely to believe such exists." I don't know what that is there. So, stereotypes. What's the connection? I is for Indian. Woo, woo, woo. Let's play Indian. Next Halloween costume, it can be an Indian. We're not talking tribe specific. We're just talking Indian, those savages, beasts in general. Great quote from Martin Luther King, right? "Our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, the Indian, was an inferior race." What's the connection? What we should be asking is, what's the question? What's the question? And that's what we want to look at here. And the question in this class is, how can we help counter sexist and racist messages? Change the message. And this is a quote I'm going to give you every single time. "Quality multicultural literature provides an opportunity for all children to see themselves in books, fosters a positive self-esteem, and cultivates respect, empathy, and acceptance of people." Bam! There you go. I'm going to give it to you again. There it is. We get some good, diverse, first voice, culturally authentic children's books, and we spread a different message. So multicultural children's literature has been around and has been looked at for a long, long, long time. And there's all sorts of definitions, right? And a basic definition of what is multicultural children's literature is multicultural literature typically focuses on, here's what the kind of typical usual stuff is: people of color from diverse cultural, linguistic, and religious groups. So just kind of all around the world sort of stuff. And that's a very viable definition of multicultural literature. But in this class, we're kind of going to be a little more specific, and I am defining literature, multicultural children's literature, as literature about racial, ethnic, and identity. I'm adding that, minority groups that are culturally and socially different from that dominant culture, from the Anglo-Saxon majority of the U.S., who has instilled upon everybody the ideal way to be, which is to be a white citizen in the United States. So we're looking at middle class values and customs that are mostly represented in American literature, right? And that is our dominant culture, because there's more books about the dominant culture and there's more ways to measure up to that dominant culture than we have time to even talk about. And we'll look at that some more. So again, defining multicultural literature in this class, it includes literature about people who are considered to be outside of the mainstream of society and have been marginalized in some way. And so that means we're looking at stuff outside of the dominant culture. And the definition that I'm using for dominant culture is kind of a general one. So here in North America, it's male, white, heterosexual, Christian, temporarily able-bodied, or, able-bodied to a certain degree, youthful, and has access to wealth and resources. So that's what we're kind of looking at. We're looking at stuff outside of that. I mean, we're going to be looking at literature about that as well. But we're mostly looking at ways that we can represent our really diverse population in the United States in other ways through children's books. So you're saying, what's the big deal, right? What's the big deal about multicultural children's literature? And you're going to hear from me, and maybe you're already kind of figuring it out. I think it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal. Because what we know for sure is that literature helps everybody in all sorts of ways. Children's books help kids learn about themselves. It helps them learn about other people, maybe in their neighborhoods and also across the world, right? It's really a big, easy way to impart all sorts of messages to children through just wonderfully illustrated children's books or just great chapter books, great stories. But if the information provided by literature helps everyone to explore how they feel about themselves and how they feel about other people around the world, what we realize is that what could happen is we only are looking mostly at just one part of our society, the dominant culture aspect of our society. Then what we've done is we're reinforcing just one way to be, one ideal, and we'll talk about that a lot. And you got to look a certain way. Your social media feeds tell you that all the way. TikTok's telling you all about that all the time, right? So if we only look at one way to be, and it's maybe not the way you are or the way I am, then it's kind of can be oppressive, right? So if we're only looking at, as this quote says, overwhelmingly white, keeps females in traditional roles, is oriented around the needs of the wealthy, focuses on individual achievement instead of the well-being of the community, glorifies systems that keep people of color, poor people, women, and other oppressed groups in their place, then we're only looking at a certain segment of the population. And I've already said how important it is that children see themselves in books and see others in books in really positive ways. So we're in trouble here. I love this quote from Adrienne Rich. And she says, when those who have the power to name and to socially construct reality choose not to see you or hear you, whether you are dark-skinned, old, disabled, female, or speak with a different accent or dialect than theirs, when someone with the authority of a teacher, say, describes the world and you're not in it, then there's a moment of psychic disequilibrium as you've looked into a mirror and you saw nothing, right? And I think that happens. I think that happens and has happened to many people who are not of that dominant culture in our society. Whether you grew up here or you immigrated here and you see what's reflected out there in terms of who runs the country, who's on the television, the music is kind of different, but you know what I'm talking about. I think that it often happens in our wonderfully diverse classes, our diverse population at Sac State, that some of you, whether identity, culture, all sorts of ways, do not feel reflected in our society. And so again, you're thinking, wait, we're talking about children's books. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? So there's lots of great books out there that we don't even have to mess around with. We don't have to deconstruct. That Very Hungry Caterpillar, boom. It's caterpillar. That's just kind of a cute caterpillar, right? And even though it's a he, and that's, it would be good, gender neutral, right? Now we're doing what they, that works too. So, and it's just talking about counting and a way to count, and it's just wonderful. So I'm not saying kick all books out the door. I'm not saying that at all. But what we need to look at and what we will look at is that children, this is kind of the scary part, that children develop concepts of race and gender and all the other stuff, stereotypes at a very young age. And so research has shown by 5, that's like they're just getting into kindergarten, that kids have already developed high levels of racial intolerance, right? And so what can we do? Ta-da! This is what I'm talking about, how powerful books are, is reach them when they're young and let them see the diversity and the wonderfulness of our society through children's books. And show it to adults too, because that's a good platform sometimes, and you don't want to get in someone's face about whatever they are, that we can show them some books that really open up people's hearts and understanding as to how incredibly lucky we are in the United States to have the rich, diverse population that we have. It's like fantastic, right? I love Annie Dillard. She's a poet, and I really like what she's talking about in one of her books. It wasn't a poetry book, but another one, where she was really interested in Alice in Wonderland. So if you did grow up, or you haven't seen in the U.S., or haven't seen the Alice in Wonderland book itself, there is the Alice in Wonderland Disney movie as well. And so the whole deal is Alice goes all over the place, and she eats stuff, and one pill makes her larger. And then something else will make a little bite of a cookie can make her smaller. And so Dillard just loved the idea of this kind of shape shifting, and she imagines Alice just kind of taking a little bite of a cookie or whatever, and just paring down to almost nothing, right? Just that she's just just this little bitty nothing, and she can just slip through the mirror's crack, and she can just be rendered almost invisible. And she just thought that was horrific. And so that's kind of an idea in here. How do we just make sure that our population, all of our population, isn't rendered almost invisible, right? That's an important question in here, and that answer is really to question the designated default, the dominant culture. And so we're going to look at that a lot in here, maybe ad nauseum for some of you, but I think it's important to consider the evolution, the history of children's books, and where they've come from, where they're going to, and still where they need to go to. So it's exciting stuff for me anyway. And so I think my job as your teacher for this children's book scene. Well, wait, first let me tell you about this children's book. So I love the idea of this book. So that's Miss, would rather be Ms., but okay, Miss Smith, and some magic book that she has. So she has this magic book, and she's a teacher. And so when she and her class open up the book, they go to a different adventure all the time. How cool is that? So in this book, it was about opening up the book and going back to time, to the age of dinosaurs. How cool, right? And it's beautifully illustrated, the watercolors. And I mean, look she's a pretty cool looking teacher, right? She's kind of got it going on, right? She's got her black leather jacket on, and like her hair spiking up, some cool glasses and all of that. So, that's really interesting. So I grabbed this book thinking it's going to be cool. From the library. And one of the reasons is because, surprisingly, even though 99% of elementary school teachers are female, guess what? The 99% of them, until fairly recently, have been portrayed in books. They're all male. So I'm thinking, okay, this is a win-win right now, because cool looking things they're doing, cool looking teacher, and she's a female, so better representation. Unfortunately, and then when I also opened up, there's like diverse population in their classroom, so it's not all white. Yay! So then I just thought, okay, this is good enough. I vetted it enough. This is a good enough thing. It's going to be great. And then I read the story out loud, and I realized that the one thing that I didn't want to have happen in this book happened. And that was that, oh my gosh, this lecture is getting long. I got to hurry. that a kid saves her, because this pterodactyl takes her up into this nest. Help. So her little 6-year-old class, because she's a kindergarten teacher, her 6-year-old class, somebody's going to save her. And who does she pick to save her? She picks, out of all the diversity, she picks a white boy to save her. And am I saying that white boys can't save teachers? First of all, she should be saving herself. Let's make that clear. She, she's a strong woman. She should be doing it. But okay. But so, am I saying that white boys can't come to the rescue? No, I'm not saying that at all. But we want to counter some of the constant messages. So in here, we're going to counter it by looking at things a little bit closer. So my obligation as your teacher in here is to make you kind of really look a little bit closer at what a good first voice, authentic, multicultural children's book is and what it can do, right? Because we don't want anyone to be slipping through those cracks at all, right? This is what we want to do. We want to tell those tales properly. And we want to, they're big. We want, I mean, the tales to children, stories to children, all of us, stories to us, they're big, important things. And I think that what we need to know that these books, and even if we don't realize it, that books actually act as a compass, a moral compass for kids. They tell them how they're supposed to be in the world. And if you're not reflected in this world, or you're just kind of callous about other people in this world, it's just telling the wrong story. So you can tell I love books, right? So in here, that's my favorite book, The Blue-Nosed Witch, when I was growing up. And here's why. Because I'm old. And so when I was growing up, there were no girls in any books at all. Zero. I mean, certainly nobody of color, but no girls. So I loved this because there was a girl that was the protagonist, the main person. She was really cool. She had this blue nose, and she had to powder it so people wouldn't tell she was a witch because she had to hide it. And so it was just an awesome book. And so I think it's important. It was really resonated for me a million years ago that book was there. And that's what we want, right? We want books that reflect our kids so that they can really feel connected to stories. I mean, I had to patch stuff together, right? I had to patch things together. And I love this book, My Side of the Mountain. It's a chapter book because this kid from New York had to go live in the woods. His parents let him do it, and he lived on his grandfather's land. It was so cool. And he tamed this falcon. He did all this cool stuff, and it was really great. I loved it. But oh my gosh, what do you think if it had been someone that reflected me, just like, physically, like it was a girl? Like, how cool would that have been? So when you think about books that you really loved, how did you connect to them? We'll talk about that later for sure. Like, there's ways to do that. And again, there's some fabulous books out there, so I'm not trying to just shut down all books, but we're looking at things a little differently here, right? We're going to try to do something that will help get us away from the older books that have not reflected everybody in our keep going here in our culture. And that's what that's what this class is all about. So I just kind of wanted to give you the rundown. And again, I just get excited about all of it, and I talk on and on. Is that enough? Are there any more? Last one. Come on. Oh, no. It keeps going. Oh, wait. Go back. Okay, so there's great books out there, and we're going to look at them. Some really good ones. So this is a class about writing and reading. Lots of writing, but we're going to be looking at books that can help us do more of the writing, and we're going to be looking at some great articles, as I said in my little intro video. So there's ways to get through the writing aspect of this whole thing. So lots of that, and lots of stuff we're going to be talking about or covering that sometimes can be triggering for some people, and also maybe not things that you necessarily want to talk about. So if you look at the first video, my intro video, you can see what the class objectives are. And what I just want to say is that we are going to really kind of wring some books out until they dry. They're dry and presentable for us to look at. Is that because we don't want to devalue any part of our society, right? We want to reflect everybody in our society. We want to do that. So it's not all about fun with Dick and Jane, which is really old. How about fun with Darius and Jada? Oh, or just how about fun with Jada, right? So a great thing that you're going to be looking at this first week, the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And that's what we're working on here, the telling of the tale, and making sure that we really dig deep and get into all sorts of ways to reflect and celebrate our diverse society. Okay, that's all. Thanks for listening.